Welcome to Classics with Kelsey and Sarah, and today we are talking about the Confessions by Saint Augustine, which was my favorite book from our year of classics.
Yes, and my favorite as well, yes.
It's the autobiography of Saint Augustine of Hippo, and with one of the early church fathers, and one of the first, I believe it was if I remember my research correctly, the first autobiography, or one of the very earliest autobiographies.
That's what I read as well.
So it was early art form, but it was, I really liked this edition. I had a little trouble because I had like 2 or 3 different options, actually. I laid 2 on my Kindle and 1 we had on our family bookshelves, and one of them was an updated and abridged version, and I started reading it and was like, this just doesn't feel right. And 2 others were abridged, and I was like, no, I want to read the actual thing. So I ended up buying this one from Penguin Classics, which I feel like did a good job translating it and updating the language enough that I can understand, but without losing a lot. So it was really good.
Yeah. One of the things that stood out to us the most was how he was writing his autobiography, but he was almost talking to God.
Yes.
It was beautiful, just the way he wrote, and so he would talk about the events of his life, and he would kind of maybe philosophize about certain things, like from his childhood, but it was all almost like he was just in conversation with God, and so he would have these places interspersed with just like passionate outpourings of just like praise and love and thanksgiving, and it was just really beautiful.
Yeah, it was like, if I wrote an autobiography, I would want it to sound like this, because you still got a very clear sense of what his life was like and what God rescued him from, but like he would be in the middle of saying something. He's like, oh, but you, God, rescued me, and thank you so much. And it was just heart full of gratefulness to God for what he did, and you got a lot of his emotional ups and downs, and the things that brought him close to God, and the things that were hard for him to deal with, but all of it just pointing back to God's goodness and grace. It was very powerful.
It started when he was a child, like maybe even at his birth too. I think he would, he kind of described some of the circumstances there, and how he, I believe his mother was a Christian.
Yes.
And so he maybe was like a nominal Christian, but he did not have the spiritual awakening, a real spiritual awakening, until he was a young man, I believe. And so it was also really inspiring how his mother prayed for him all those years. And so he had a very strong intellect. He was a very smart, intelligent person, and so a lot of his book also kind of contains some theology, and looks at different beliefs of that era. I think it was 397 was around when it was written, and so it was interesting to see how he addressed certain heresies that I think the Manichaeans were, I'm probably saying that wrong, but that was probably I think one of the biggest things that he addressed. And
so even though the Manichaeans aren't around anymore, nothing's really new under the sun, and even though some of the things I was looking at and going, that doesn't really exist anymore, really some of the basic stuff does, and you could see some of how his arguments apply to even some stuff today.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. He was such a pioneer of I think of kind of Christian theological writing too. So you can see how his writings influenced later Christianity too, and so it was it felt like a really important work to read.
Yeah. And definitely, like, a lot of apologetics and stuff, because he was so smart, and he was into a lot of arguments before he became a Christian, and then he turned and used that, I would say. A lot of apologetics, just that, especially in the form we would recognize them, probably got a lot of their start with Augustine.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, and it was really neat how he, the book is divided into 13 different volumes, and so each one kind of focuses on a different thing, and So that's it's a slow read, so
Yes.
don't be afraid to take your time with it. I remember reading it a lot of times at night, and it felt like a very good devotional read, and things to think about before I go to bed. And so it's not light reading by any means, but well worth it.
Oh yeah, it is up on my top 10 books for this year because it was just so good and powerful.
Yes, it's on my top list too. So.
Yeah. Yep, so obviously we both highly recommend the Confessions of Saint Augustine. And that's all for this week's edition of Classics with Kelsey and Sarah. And next week we are going to be talking about Kidnapped.
Yeah.